When the cemetery swelled overnight, townsfolk noticed fresh graves, but no funerals. In 1881, in the remote town of Jericho, Utah, the cemetery swelled overnight with fresh graves, but no funerals were held. No one knew who was being buried or why. Silas Grey, the town's undertaker, seemed eerily unaffected by the growing number of graves and the town's growing fear. Whispers spread, but no one dared question him. But what they did know was that Silas wasn't just burying the dead, he was bringing them back, and his dark secrets would soon unravel a terrifying legacy that no one could escape. What was buried in Jericho was about to rise again. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Jericho's cemetery, when Caleb first noticed something strange. He had passed the gravesite countless times before, but tonight was different. Tonight, there were more graves, fresh ones, dozens of them. But there had been no funerals, no announcements, no mourning. And yet, the town's cemetery was growing. Caleb paused at the wrought iron gates, staring at the newly disturbed earth. Something gnawed at him, something he couldn't quite explain. The graves were too neat, the soil too fresh, as if the earth had been carefully disturbed. There were no signs of a recent funeral, no grieving relatives to be seen. The cemetery felt wrong. It wasn't just the graves. It was the silence that hung in the air, the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of your neck stand. He had heard the whispers, of course. The town had always been full of rumors, but something about this felt different. The graves were multiplying with no explanation, and Silas Grey, the town's undertaker, was at the heart of it all. Caleb knew Silas well, a quiet man with an unsettling calm, someone who moved through the town like a shadow. But he never seemed to care about the growing number of graves. It was as if they were just a part of his routine, part of the work he had always done. The first strange thing Caleb had noticed was the lack of mourning. In a town like Jericho, death was a communal affair. People gathered to mourn the passing of loved ones, to share their grief. But not this time. The graves just appeared, and no one seemed to ask questions. Caleb knew something was wrong, but what could he do? He was just one person, and the town had learned long ago not to question Silas. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that the cemetery was hiding something. As the days passed, he found himself returning again and again, drawn to the eerie stillness that seemed to have taken hold of the graves. He knew he had to find out more. Something was happening in Jericho, something dark and powerful, and it was all centered around the Undertaker. It was late one evening when Caleb decided to confront Silas. The old man's funeral parlor was located on the edge of town, a building that had stood for decades, its windows dark and foreboding. Caleb had walked past it countless times, but tonight he felt compelled to enter. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, the smell of formaldehyde and incense hit him. The air was thick, oppressive. Silas sat behind a desk in the far corner of the room, his back turned as he scribbled something on a piece of paper. He didn't look up when Caleb entered. "You've been busy," Caleb said, his voice breaking the silence. Silas didn't respond at first, as if he hadn't heard. Then, slowly, he turned his chair to face Caleb. His pale eyes were cold, distant. "What brings you here, Caleb?" Silas asked, his voice low and almost soothing. Caleb hesitated. "The graves, the ones that keep appearing in the cemetery. No funerals, no families, just more graves every day." "What's going on, Silas?" The Undertaker's face remained unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "There are always graves, Caleb. Death is a constant in this world. It's only natural." Caleb's frustration bubbled over. "Natural? There's something wrong with. No one's mourning these people. No one even knows who they are. And you're not doing anything about it." For a moment there was silence. Then Silas spoke, his voice even softer than before. "There are things in this world, Caleb, that most people cannot comprehend. Things far older than they are. Things that can't be understood by the living." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Silas smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was cold, knowing. "You are asking the wrong questions, Caleb. You should be asking yourself what you would do if you could bring back the dead." Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. "What? You're saying you..." "I'm not saying anything," Silas interrupted, his voice sharp. "But the truth is out there, waiting for you to find it." And with that, Silas turned back to his desk, as if the conversation was over. Caleb stood there for a moment, unsure of what just happened. The Undertaker's words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of foreboding. The next day, Caleb returned to the cemetery. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what Silas had said. What did he mean by bring back the dead? Was that even possible? But as he walked past the fresh graves once again, something caught his eye. One of the graves had been disturbed. The earth had been freshly dug up, but there was no headstone, no markings, just an empty hole, as if someone had been pulled from the earth. His heart pounded in his chest. The thought that someone had been buried alive or worse, dragged from their grave, made his blood run cold. He had to know the truth. There was something hidden beneath Jericho, something the Undertaker wasn't telling anyone. Caleb had no idea what he was walking into. What he didn't know was that the answer to the mystery of the fresh graves was more terrifying than he could ever imagine. The ground beneath his feet suddenly felt unstable, as if it might give way at any moment. The air grew thick and oppressive, like the cemetery itself was holding its breath. Caleb's pulse raced as he looked around, desperate to make sense of the growing horror. What he didn't know was that the dead weren't the only ones rising, and Silas was about to reveal just how far he had gone to bring them back. But Caleb's discovery was only the tip of the iceberg. The deeper he dug, the darker the truth became, and it was a truth that would change everything. Caleb couldn't shake the images of the disturbed grave from his mind. The earth had been turned over, yet no one seemed to notice. No one spoke of the dead rising or of the strange happenings around town. Silas had spoken cryptically, but his words echoed in Caleb's mind. What would you do if you could bring back the dead? He spent the next few days in a haze, haunted by the mystery, desperate for answers. But the town was strangely quiet. There were no answers, only the looming presence of Silas and the inexplicable swell of fresh graves in the cemetery. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Caleb turned to old Mora, the town's reclusive historian. She lived on the edge of town in a crumbling house that seemed as ancient as the stories she told. The locals whispered that Mora knew more about the town's past than anyone alive. If anyone had answers, it would be her. He found her sitting on her porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm afternoon sun. Her eyes were sharp, glinting with a wisdom that didn't quite belong in the frail body that housed it. "You've been asking questions," she said without greeting, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I can see it in your eyes. It's the same look I had when I started digging into Jericho's history." Caleb didn't waste time. "It's the graves. They're growing. No funerals, no families, just more graves every day. I don't understand it." Mora stared at him for a long moment, her wrinkled face unreadable. "You should be careful, Caleb. Some things are better left buried." "I don't have a choice," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I need to know what's going on. What's Silas hiding? Why are the graves multiplying?" Mora sighed, and her gaze dropped to her hands folded in her lap. "Silas isn't who you think he is. Hez not just an Undertaker. Hez part of something older, something that's been here long before Jericho was founded. The town's built on blood, Caleb. The earth here is cursed." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, cursed?" Mora's eyes met his, cold and knowing. "There was a cult here long before your time. A death cult, worshipping the gods of the underworld. They believed that death was not the end, but a doorway. They performed rituals to bring the dead back, but not just in the way you think." Caleb's pulse quickened. "You mean they resurrected the dead?" She nodded slowly. "Not exactly. They trapped the souls of the dead in the earth. They were never truly resurrected. They were tortured, bound to the land, forced to serve the will of those who could control them." The air felt heavy, like the ground beneath their feet was waiting to swallow them both. Caleb felt his breath catch in his throat. But why? Why would Silas want to do that? Mora leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because Silas isn't just an Undertaker. As an apprentice, Caleb has learning to control death itself, and the cult isn't just some relic of the past. It's still here, operating in the shadows. Silas is part of it, and has the key to bringing it back." Caleb stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. "You're saying the cult never died? That Silas is trying to resurrect it?" Mora's eyes flickered with something dangerous, something Caleb couldn't place. Not just resurrect it, Hez planning to take control of it. Jericho was always meant to be the center of their power. The cemetery, the graves, they're all part of a ritual. Silas is bringing the dead back to life, but only to use them as pawns in a much larger game. Caleb felt his stomach churn. What's he going to do with them? Mora didn't answer immediately. Her eyes grew distant, lost in memories too painful to share. The dead can be controlled, manipulated, and the more he brings back, the stronger his power grows. The town is just the beginning. Hez going to use the graves to create an army of the dead. The thought struck Caleb like a physical blow. The air around him seemed to thicken, as if the weight of her words was pressing down on him. "How do I stop him?" Mora's face hardened, and she shook her head. "You don't understand. It's not that simple. Silas isn't the only one who can control the dead, as just the latest. There have been others before him. The cult's influence is everywhere, Caleb. and the power they wield goes far beyond what you can imagine. He was losing control of the conversation, but the desperation in his chest wouldn't let him stop. There has to be something I can do. There must be a way to stop him. Maura stood, walking to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room. She pulled out an old, worn book, its pages yellowed with age. She handed it to Caleb, her hands trembling as she did. "This is all I have left of the cult's history. It's dangerous, Caleb. Don't look into it unless you are ready to face what's coming." Caleb took the book, feeling the weight of it in his hands. It was more than just pages and ink. It was the key to everything he had been searching for. He opened it cautiously, scanning the ancient script. Words he couldn't understand leapt off the pages, but there was one thing that stood out to him, a symbol he had seen before, etched into the edge of one of the new graves. "Is this the cult symbol?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maura nodded. "That's their mark, and Silas has been carving it into the graves to bind the souls to the earth." The book felt heavier now, as if the burden of its knowledge was pressing on him. The truth was darker than Head ever imagined, and yet it was only the beginning. Silas wasn't just raising the dead. He was summoning something far worse. Caleb turned to leave, the book clutched tightly in his hands, but Maura stopped him with one final warning. "Remember, Caleb, the dead do not stay buried forever, and once Silas has control over them, there will be no stopping him." As Caleb walked away from Maura's house, the weight of her words gnawed at him. The town was in danger, and time was running out. Silas had an army of the dead at his command, and Caleb had no idea how to stop it. But one thing was certain, the truth was far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. But Caleb didn't know that Silas was already preparing for the final stage of his ritual. And once it began, the dead wouldn't just rise, they would take everything in their path. Caleb couldn't sleep. The words from old Maura echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat, her warnings about Silas and the cult gnawing at his thoughts. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew. The town of Jericho was built on blood, she had said, and it wasn't just Silas who was playing God with death. The entire town, perhaps the entire land, was caught in the web of something far darker than Caleb could have ever imagined. The book Maura had given him weighed heavily in his hands. He couldn't stop thinking about the symbol, the one that matched the one carved into the graves in the cemetery. It was more than just a mark. It was the key to understanding the ritual that Silas was preparing to perform. And if Caleb didn't stop him soon, there would be no turning back. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. As dawn broke, Caleb made his way back to the cemetery. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. The graves seemed to loom over him, like silent sentinels watching his every move. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He was no longer just a curious observer. He was part of this dark story, and there was no escaping it now. He needed answers, and the only place to get them was the cemetery itself. The graves were growing, multiplying overnight, but no one seemed to notice, no one except him. As he walked deeper into the graveyard, his eyes scanned the ground for any sign of the symbol. It had to be here, somewhere. It was the key to understanding how Silas was bringing the dead back. The ground felt cold beneath his feet, and the air seemed to close in around him. Every step felt like it was leading him closer to the truth and closer to his own doom. He finally found it, a grave unlike any other. The soil was freshly disturbed, and the symbol was carved into the headstone, glowing faintly in the dim morning light. Caleb's heart raced. This was it. This was the grave that would lead him to the heart of Silas' ritual. He knelt down, inspecting the grave. The earth had been dug out, but there was no body inside, just an empty hole. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. There, at the bottom of the grave, was something much worse. A strange, blackened object, half buried in the dirt. It was a small box, intricately carved with the same symbol Caleb had seen in the book. His hand trembled as he reached for it. As soon as his fingers touched the box, a jolt of cold shot through his body, like electricity coursing through his veins. He recoiled, pulling his hand back, but the box didn't let go of him. The chill lingered, and his skin prickled with an unnerving sense of dread. The box was alive. He had to know what was inside. With shaking hands, Caleb picked up the box again and carefully opened it. Inside was a small, weathered scroll. He unfurled it cautiously, revealing a series of symbols and markings, some of which he recognized from the book Maura had given him. The words were in an ancient script, something far older than anything he had seen before. As he studied the scroll, his breath caught in his throat. The symbols were part of the ritual, the same ritual Silas was planning to complete. This wasn't just a resurrection of the dead. It was something far more sinister, This ritual was designed to bind the souls of the dead to the earth permanently, and once completed, Silas would gain control over life and death itself. The implications of this were horrifying. Silas wasn't just raising the dead for his own power. He was trapping them, forcing them into servitude for eternity. And the worst part, Caleb realized with growing terror that he wasn't just an observer in this ritual. He was part of it. He had been marked by the cult the moment he stepped into Jericho. Silas knew about him, knew that he would eventually come for the truth. Caleb wasn't the hunter, he was the hunted. Suddenly, Caleb heard a rustling sound behind him. He turned sharply, his pulse racing, only to find himself face to face with Silas. The Undertaker's pale face was expressionless, but his cold eyes burned with an intensity that made Caleb's skin crawl. "You shouldn't have looked," Silas said, his voice low and calm, as if the words were spoken in some distant place, disconnected from the gravity of the situation. "The truth is never meant for the living. It's a burden you were never meant to bear." Caleb stepped back, the scroll still in his hand. "What are you doing, Silas? What are you really after?" Silas took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Am doing what must be done. This town, this land is cursed, Caleb. The dead are not meant to rest. They are tools, and I will use them to reshape the world." Caleb's mind raced. He needed to stop Silas before it was too late. But how? How could he possibly fight someone who controlled the dead, who had mastered the rituals that could bind souls to the earth? He was just one man, alone in a town that had already fallen under the Undertaker's sway. Silas reached for the scroll in Caleb's hand, his fingers brushing against it lightly. Caleb instinctively pulled it away, but Silas smiled, an almost predatory grin spreading across his face. "You can't stop it, Caleb. It's already begun. The ritual is in motion. The dead will rise, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, a flood of adrenaline pushing him into action. He could feel the cold of the grave pressing in around him, the weight of Silas' words crushing his chest. He wasn't just up against Silas. He was up against something far older, far darker. He needed to destroy the ritual. He needed to stop it before the dead rose completely. Silas stepped back, his smile turning into a sneer. "The dead will rise, Caleb. They always do." But Caleb wasn't listening anymore. His mind was made up. He turned to run, clutching the scroll tightly in his hand. But the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift. The cemetery had come alive. The earth trembled, and Caleb felt the undeniable presence of something rising beneath him, something dark, something that was coming for him. But as Caleb fled, he didn't realize that Silas had already set the wheels in motion. The dead weren't just rising from the graves. They were coming for him. Caleb barely managed to escape the cemetery. His heart was pounding, each breath sharp and shallow as he ran through the dense fog that clung to the town like a second skin. The scroll was still clutched tightly in his hand, its weight a constant reminder of the power Silas held and the horrors that were yet to come. He could hear the cemetery, behind him, the earth groaning and shifting, like the ground itself was waking from a long, cursed sleep. The rising dead were no longer a threat in theory. They were real, tangible, and they were coming. He didn't stop running until he reached his house, slamming the door shut behind him. But as he leaned against it, gasping for air, a cold realization settled over him. The ritual Silas had started was already underway. The dead were rising, and there was nothing Caleb could do to stop them. But there was something he could do. The scroll, the ancient script, held the key. He had to decipher it. But his mind was racing, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had learned. The cult wasn't just trying to bring the dead back. They were trying to create an army that would serve them, obey them, and destroy anyone who stood in their way. Caleb's fingers trembled as he opened the scroll once more. The symbols blurred in front of his eyes. He didn't know what any of it meant, but there had to be something in there that could help him. There had to be a way to break the curse. A sudden knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? Was it Silas, come to finish what he had started? He hesitated, then opened the door slowly. To his surprise, it wasn't Silas standing there. It was someone far worse. Standing in front of him was a woman he didn't recognize, dressed in dark, tattered clothes. Her eyes were hollow, sunken, and her face was pale, deathly pale. She looked like she had been dead for years, but somehow she was standing in front of him, her hands twitching as if they were trying to grab him. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice barely audible, like a distant echo. "You have to stop it. You have to stop him before he raises them all." Caleb's blood ran cold. What are you?" The woman stepped closer, her breath cold and rancid. I was one of them, one of Silas' first victims. I didn't ask for this. None of us did. She shuddered, her eyes filling with tears. We're trapped, Caleb. Silas isn't just bringing us back. He's using us, controlling us. And now, He's going to make an army out of all of us. Her words sent a chill down Caleb's spine. The woman was a ghost, a victim of Silas' twisted experiments, brought back to life to do his bidding. But something about her presence seemed different. She wasn't like the other resurrected souls Caleb had heard about. She was aware. She was trying to warn him. How do I stop it? Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes flickered with a hint of desperation. You have to stop the ritual at its source. There's a tomb beneath the cemetery, hidden deep underground. It's where Silas has been performing the final part of the ritual. If you destroy it, the power will be broken. But you have to hurry. The dead are already rising. Before Caleb could ask any more questions, the woman let out a high-pitched wail, her body convulsing as if something was pulling her back into the earth. Her form began to flicker, becoming translucent, before she vanished. Entirely like a fading shadow. Caleb stood frozen in place, staring at the empty doorway. The weight of her warning settled over him. The dead weren't just walking the earth. They were rising, and with each step they took, they grew stronger, more powerful. He had no time to waste. Silas had to be stopped, or Jericho and everything Caleb cared about would be swallowed by the dead. Caleb grabbed the scroll, tucking it into his jacket, and made his way back to the cemetery. The fog had thickened, wrapping the town in an oppressive shroud. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of his boots on the wet ground. As he neared the cemetery gates, he saw them, the dead. They were no longer confined to the graves. They were wandering the streets, their eyes vacant, their faces twisted in unnatural grins. Some were shuffling aimlessly, while others moved with a deliberate purpose, their movements jerky, almost mechanical. Caleb's heart raced. He had to get to the tomb beneath the cemetery. He could allow Silas to complete the ritual, but how could he possibly get past the army of the dead? Then he heard it, the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, heart in his throat, only to find the last person he expected. It was Mora. Mora? Caleb gasped, disbelief flooding his voice. What are you doing here? She was different. Her face was pale, her skin almost gray, but her eyes were still sharp, still full of fire. I couldn't sit idly by, she said, her voice hoarse but determined. You're not alone in this, Caleb. The cult may have its hold over the dead, but there are others like me, people who knew about the cult before it disappeared. But you're dead, Caleb stammered, his mind racing. How are you? I'm not dead, Mora said softly, her gaze unwavering. I was resurrected just like the others, but I'm still myself, still aware. And now, it's my turn to stop Silas. Caleb didn't know what to say. Mora, like the woman before her, was a victim of Silas' rituals, but she was different. She wasn't controlled by him. She had retained her mind. Then let's end this, Caleb said, determination flooding his veins. Together, as the two of them made their way into the cemetery, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. The dead were closing in, but this time, Caleb wasn't running. He had a purpose, and nothing would stop him now. But what Caleb didn't realize was that the tomb beneath the cemetery held far more than Silas' power. There was something far darker waiting for him in the depths. The cemetery had become a battlefield. The air was thick with an unnatural fog, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Caleb and Mora walked side by side, the weight of their mission pressing down on them with each step. The graves were no longer simply places of burial. They were traps, prisons for the souls Silas had enslaved, and the dead walked the streets with purpose. Do you think we reach too late? Caleb asked, his voice barely audible, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cemetery. Mora glanced at him, her face solemn but resolute. It's not too late, but we're close. Silas has the power to bring them back, but he doesn't control them completely, not yet. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. The dead were rising, and they were growing stronger by the minute. Silas was one step away from completing the ritual that would give him dominion over life and death itself. He had to be stopped before the army of the dead grew too large, before Jericho became a town of the damned. They approached the tomb that Mora had mentioned earlier. It was hidden beneath the graveyard, an old, crumbling structure partially buried in the earth. Caleb felt an overwhelming sense of dread as they descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with every step. Silas is in there, Mora said, her voice tight with warning. This is where the ritual takes place. If we destroy it, we destroy his power. Caleb nodded, tightening his grip on the scroll. It was the only thing standing between them and total destruction. The scroll held the ancient words that could break the curse if they could figure them out in time. The door to the tomb creaked as Caleb pushed it open, and the stench of decay filled the air. Inside, the space was vast and eerily silent. The walls were lined with symbols, the same ones Caleb had seen in the scroll. But there was something more, something darker. In the center of the room was a raised altar, and surrounding it were several bodies, their eyes open but lifeless. They weren't completely dead. They were in between, suspended in a state of eternal limbo. At the far end of the chamber, Silas stood, his back to them. The soft glow of a single candle illuminated his face, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the altar. He didn't turn around as they entered. "You shouldn't have come, Caleb," Silas said softly, his voice smooth and cold. "You've already seen too much. Now you'll join them." Caleb's heart raced. He could feel the weight of Silas' power in the room, the energy in the air charged with dark magic, but he couldn't back down now. He had come too far. "What are you doing, Silas?" Caleb demanded. "You're playing with things you don't understand. These people, these souls, they deserve to rest." Silas finally turned to face them, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of amusement and malice. "You still don't understand, do you, Caleb? Death is a gift. It's a power one that I will control. These souls aren't victims. They are the key to immortality, and I will use them to reshape the world, starting with Jericho." He gestured to the altar, where a glowing symbol was etched into the stone. It pulsed with an eerie light, like a heartbeat of the earth itself. "This ritual is more than just bringing the dead back to life. It's about control, power, and with it, I will be unstoppable." Caleb felt a surge of anger. He couldn't let Silas succeed. He couldn't let the dead be used as pawns in some twisted game of immortality. "I won't let you do this," Caleb said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "There's still time. I can stop you." Silas smirked. "You think you can stop me with that?" He pointed to the scroll in Caleb's hand. "That ancient relic is nothing more than a trinket. The ritual is already in motion, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." But Caleb wasn't listening. He stepped forward, ignoring Silas' taunts. He had to focus. The scroll, the symbols, they held the answer. He needed to understand them, and fast. Mora stepped forward, her face pale, but her eyes burning with resolve. "The ritual needs a sacrifice, a soul to bind the dead to the earth," she said quietly. "That's what Silas is after. Hez not just controlling them, Hez using their souls to create an army." Caleb's eyes widened as he realized the truth. The dead weren't just being resurrected, they were being trapped, used as tools to fuel Silas' power. He had to stop the ritual, but how? "Caleb, look at the altar," Mora whispered. "It's the heart of the ritual. The key is in the symbol. If we can destroy it, the power will break." Caleb turned to the altar, his eyes scanning the glowing symbol. It was a sigil, a binding mark that held the dead to the earth. He had seen it before, in the scroll. The answer was right there, hidden in plain sight. With trembling hands, Caleb reached for the scroll, his heart racing. He had to act quickly. Silas was already preparing to finish the ritual, and once it was completed, there would be no going back. "Caleb, don't!" Mora cried out, but it was too late. Caleb recited the incantation from the scroll, his voice shaky but steady. The moment the final word left his lips, the room seemed to tremble. The ground beneath their feet shuddered, and the dead bodies on the altar began to stir. A low, guttural moan filled the room, and Caleb could feel the very air around him grow thick with dark energy. Suddenly, the altar erupted in a flash of blinding light. Caleb was thrown backward, the force of the explosion knocking him to the ground. When his vision cleared, he saw Silas standing at the altar, a look of pure rage on his face. "You fool," Silas snarled. "You've only delayed the inevitable. You can't stop me." But Caleb didn't hear him. He was focused on the altar. The sigil was crumbling, the power unraveling in front of him. The bodies on the altar began to twitch, their eyes blank but filled with a strange, unnatural light. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the ritual stopped. The light from the altar faded, and the air grew still. The dead remained still, their bodies lifeless once more. Caleb's heart was still racing, but the weight of the dark magic had lifted. For now, Jericho was safe. But Silas wasn't done. The power had been broken, but the cost was high. Caleb had thought he had won. But what he didn't realize was that Silas' power wasn't just in the dead, it was in the very land itself. And that power was far from gone. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as the last of the dead lay still. The ritual was over for now, but the air still felt thick, charged with an energy that refused to dissipate. He took a shaky breath, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. They had stopped Silas, but it felt too easy. The dead, once rising from their graves with violent hunger, now lay in quiet repose. The sigil that had bound them to the earth was gone, shattered by Caleb's actions. The cursed power that had threatened to take over Jericho had been broken, but Silas wasn't finished. Caleb could see it in his eyes, the rage, the desperation. Silas had been so close to completing his ritual, to commanding an army of the undead, and now that the ritual had faltered, the Undertaker's thirst for control was at its peak. "You think you've won?" Silas spat, his voice low, dripping with malice. "You've only delayed what's coming. You can't destroy death, Caleb. You can't destroy me." The Undertaker's words rang through the tomb, and Caleb's grip tightened on the scroll. Head recited the incantation. Head shattered the sigil. But Silas was still standing, still breathing, still there. Caleb's stomach tightened as a thought crossed his mind. What if Silas' power wasn't just tied to the ritual? What if it was tied to something deeper? The land, the earth itself, that's what Mora had said. The curse was ancient, woven into the fabric of Jericho. Caleb wasn't just fighting Silas. He was fighting the very ground beneath his feet. The earth rumbled beneath them, the tremors shaking the walls of the tomb. Caleb's pulse quickened, and he felt the ground crack open beneath him. The dead were stirring again, not as mere puppets of Silas' will, but as something far more dangerous, something he had no way of understanding. "This is where it ends, Caleb," Silas said, his voice almost a whisper, as if he were speaking from a great distance. "You can't stop what you've already unleashed." Caleb's eyes darted around the room. He couldn't let Silas complete whatever he was trying to do. The dead were already shifting beneath the earth. If Silas regained control, there would be no stopping him. Jericho would be his kingdom, ruled by the dead. But as Caleb's gaze flickered over the altar, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The altar was moving. The stone itself was shifting, rising from the ground. It wasn't just an altar. It was a vessel, a conduit for the ritual, a focal point for Silas' power, and it was alive. The ground beneath Caleb cracked wide open. A blackened tendril shot up from the earth, wrapping around his legs, pulling him toward the altar. The darkness that had once been contained was now free, and it was pulling him in. "Caleb, no!" Mora cried, but it was too late. The force of the power was overwhelming. He couldn't escape. He fell to his knees, struggling against the pull of the earth. Silas' laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound so cold, so unnerving. It sent shivers down Caleb's spine. "You should have stayed away, Caleb," Silas taunted. "This land is mine. The dead are mine. You've only played into my hands, and now you'll be the final piece of the puzzle." But Caleb's mind was racing, desperate for a way out. The scroll, the incantation. There had to be something left, something he missed. The symbols, the ancient script. The answer was in there. It was the only way to break the bond, to stop Silas for good. As the tendrils of darkness began to pull him into the altar, Caleb's hand fumbled in his pocket. The scroll, it was still there. He had to act now. The words on the page were blurry, but he could see it, faintly, the final part of the incantation. He spoke the words, barely able to breathe as the power swirled around him. But this time, something was different. The earth trembled violently, and the light in the tomb flickered as if the very essence of the land was being torn apart. The symbols on the scroll began to glow, matching the glow of the sigil on the altar. The tendrils stopped pulling. The earth itself seemed to freeze, holding its breath. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the altar cracked. The stone shattered, sending fragments flying in all directions. The ground beneath Caleb's feet buckled, and for a moment, everything went dark. When Caleb opened his eyes, the tomb was silent. The dead lay still, unmoving. The pulsing power that had filled the air had vanished. Silas was gone. The altar, once a source of unimaginable power, lay in ruins, shattered into pieces. But the victory felt hollow. The land around Jericho had been scarred by the ritual, and Caleb could feel it deep in his bones. The darkness that had gripped the town wasn't fully gone. It lingered in the air, like a shadow, waiting for the right moment to return. Mora stood beside him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You've done it, Caleb. The dead are free." "But the cost I know," Caleb whispered. The weight of what they had done pressed down on him. They had destroyed the ritual, but the price had been steep. The land was still cursed, still tied to the power of death. The ground beneath them trembled once more. a faint reminder that the power Silas had unleashed was far from gone. "Is it over?" Caleb asked, his voice shaking. Mora didn't answer. She simply looked at him, her gaze heavy with the knowledge that this battle had been won, but the war was far from over. What Caleb didn't know was that Silas' true power wasn't just in the dead. It was in the very land beneath Jericho, and that power had only just begun to stir. Caleb stood at the ruins of the tomb, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on him. The altar was destroyed, the dark ritual shattered, but the feeling of dread still lingered in the air. The land was scarred, the earth still echoing with the remnants of Silas' dark power. The dead were silent now, but their presence was unmistakable. It was like the ground itself was waiting for something. Waiting for him. Mora stood by his side, her expression hard and unreadable. Her pale face had a new edge to it, one that spoke of knowing something Caleb didn't, but he couldn't focus on that now. His thoughts were consumed by Silas. The man was still out there alive, no doubt, still hell-bent on achieving his twisted goals. Caleb turned to her. "What now? Is it over?" Mora's eyes darkened. "You destroyed the altar. You've stopped the ritual. But Silas is not done. Is bound to this place, to Jericho. His power is tied to it. But if the ritual is broken," Caleb began. "The ritual is broken, but Silas doesn't need it to survive," she interrupted, her voice low, almost pained. "His true strength lies in the land itself, in the curse that was placed on Jericho centuries ago. You've only scratched the surface." The air around them felt colder, the ground beneath them heavier. Caleb felt like they were standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong step away from being pulled into the abyss. "I don't understand," Caleb said, shaking his head. "We stopped him. The ritual is broken. Why hasn't everything ended?" Mora took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if searching for something just beyond reach. "There are things that go beyond ritual. Silas has been planning this for much longer than you realize. He has been using the dead, the town's suffering, the land's curse all as instruments for his real goal." Caleb's pulse quickened. What goal? The resurrection of something far older. Something far more powerful than Silas himself. Before Caleb could ask her to elaborate, a loud, guttural roar cut through the air. It echoed through the graveyard, a sound that could only be described as otherworldly. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, this time with more force, as if something was pushing up from beneath. Mora's face drained of color. It's him, Hess trying to complete the ritual, Hess reaching for something buried beneath Jericho. Suddenly, the earth split open in front of them. Caleb stumbled back, fear rising in his chest as he saw the figure emerging from the darkened ground. Silas. But this wasn't the man he had seen before. This wasn't the calm, collected Undertaker. Silas had changed. His eyes glowed with an unnatural, unholy fire, and his body seemed to shimmer with a sickly green light. "You should have stayed away, Caleb," Silas hissed, his voice distorted, echoing in the air. "You think you've stopped me? You think you've won? This land, this town, it belongs to me." Caleb took a step back, his breath shallow. "What have you done?" he demanded. "What is this?" Silas' laugh sent a chill down his spine, and the ground beneath Caleb's feet shifted once more. "I didn't need the ritual to control the dead. I didn't need it to bring them back. I've always had control over them. But now I've awakened what was hidden, and once it rises, I will be unstoppable." The ground cracked wider, and Caleb watched in horror as an immense dark shape began to emerge. From the earth, it was massive, its shadow casting over them like a dark cloud. The earth roiled beneath their feet as the figure rose higher, revealing itself to be an ancient, monstrous being, a creature of death, bound to the land itself. "Silas," Caleb whispered, horror creeping into his voice. "What is that?" that Silas said with a grin, his voice full of wicked delight. "Is the true power of Jericho, the one that gave the cult its strength, the one that has been waiting for centuries to rise again." The creature towered over them, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. It was clear now Silas wasn't just controlling the dead. He had awakened something far worse, a primal, death-driven force that had been buried beneath Jericho, waiting for the right moment to return, and that moment had arrived. Mora took a step forward, her face grim. "It's not just a monster," she said softly. "It's the soul of Jericho, bound to the earth. The curse isn't just in Silas, it's in the land. And once the creature rises, nothing will stop it." Silas' voice rose in triumph. "You see, Caleb, I never needed the dead. I needed the land. I needed the power beneath Jericho's soil, and now it's mine to control. You've played your part, but your story ends here." Caleb's mind raced. The creature, the land, Silas twisted plans. It was all connected. The curse that had plagued Jericho for so long was now being unleashed, and there was only one way to stop it. He had to destroy the creature, destroy Silas' hold over the land. But how? His eyes darted to the remnants of the shattered altar. The symbols were still visible, etched into the stone, still glowing faintly with power. He remembered what Mora had said. Silas' true power was tied to the land. The altar, the sigil, the creature. It was all one. Caleb made a decision in that moment. The only way to stop Silas and the creature was to sever the connection between them, to destroy the land's hold over the dead. He grabbed the scroll from his pocket and began reciting the incantation. But this time, he didn't stop. This time, he spoke the final words aloud, his voice shaking with the force of what he was doing. The creature let out a deafening roar as the symbols on the altar began to burn, a blinding light filling the tomb. Caleb's body trembled, but he didn't stop. He had to finish it. In that moment, the ground gave way, the earth cracked open wide, and a wave of energy surged through the air. The creature let out one final scream, a sound of pure agony as it was pulled back into the earth, its form disintegrating into dust. And then, silence. Caleb collapsed to his knees, his head spinning, his body drained. The earth was still, the air calm. The power Silas had unleashed was gone, and the creature was no more. But Silas wasn't finished. He lunged forward, his body now consumed by the power of the land, his eyes wild with fury. "Do you think you've stopped me, Caleb?" he hissed. Caleb, barely able to lift his head, whispered the final words, "Yes." With a blinding flash, Silas screamed as the last of his power was torn from him, his body disintegrating into nothingness. The creature was gone. Silas was gone. But as the dust settled, Caleb realized the price of their victory. The curse had been broken, for now, but the land was scarred, and its hunger wasn't truly gone. Jericho's dark history wasn't finished with them yet. The ground had settled. The air, once thick with the stench of death, now felt lighter, almost like a breath of relief had passed over Jericho. The creature was gone. Silas was no more. But even with the battle over, Caleb could feel the weight of something lingering, something still watching, waiting. Mora stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon, where the last traces of darkness seemed to fade into the early morning light. But she wasn't smiling. Her face, as pale as it had always been, was now drawn tight, a frown cutting through her features. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, his voice hoarse, exhausted from the ordeal. She turned slowly to face him, her expression unreadable. "You think it's over, don't you? You think Silas' death ended the curse?" Her words were sharp, slicing through the silence. "What are you talking about?" Caleb's stomach tightened. "We stopped the ritual. The creature's gone." Silas was only the beginning," she interrupted. "You don't understand, you never did." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Mora stepped back, her eyes cold. "I've been lying to you, Caleb. I never told you the full truth." A wave of confusion crashed over him. What truth? The curse doesn't just lie in the land. It's in the blood of the people who live here. The dead were never the only problem. Jericho is a town born from betrayal, from corruption, and it's been passed down, generation after generation. You thought you were fighting Silas, but there's more. There's always been more. Caleb took a step back, the gravity of her words sinking in. No, that can't be. You helped me. I helped you because I needed you," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "The town was never free. The bloodline runs deep, Caleb. You're part of it, whether you want to be or not. That's why Silas sought you out. That's why you were marked from the beginning." Caleb's world tilted. He stumbled, trying to comprehend what she was saying. "You mean I've been part of this all along?" "Yes. Your blood is tied to the curse. Your lineage, your family. They were part of the cult long before Silas ever showed up. The reason Jericho thrives and survives is because of the pact made so many years ago. The pact that was meant to bring death, but also life." A chill ran through Caleb, colder than anything he had ever felt. "What do you want from me, Mora?" She looked away, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "You have a choice now. You can break the curse, but it won't come without sacrifice. The land still hungers, and someone has to feed it." Suddenly, Caleb realized the truth. The power, the land, Silas, the dead it had. All been a setup, a trap that he had been walking into since the moment he first stepped foot in Jericho. The curse had never been meant to end. It had only shifted from one victim to another, and now it was his turn. "You're asking me to become part of this," Caleb said, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "Not just part of it," Mora said, her eyes darkening. "To rule it," Caleb recoiled. "Am not like Silas, am not like you. Her lips curled into a smile, one that was cold and hollow. "No, you are not. But you are the only one who can carry this curse forward. The bloodline demands it." The world seemed to spin around him. Caleb had fought for Jericho's freedom, fought for the town's survival, but this was something he never could have prepared for. The land, the curse, it wasn't just Silas doing. It was inescapable, and it was his inheritance, his legacy. He wasn't the savior. He was the next ruler of the darkness. The ground began to tremble again, the eerie rumbling that had preceded the rise of the creature. But this time, it wasn't the dead that were stirring. It was something worse, the town itself, alive, waiting to be fed. Caleb's chest tightened as Mora spoke again. "You have no choice, Caleb. The land needs its king. The dead need their master. And that master is you." The words hit him like a blow to the gut. He could feel it then, a deep, gnawing hunger in the earth beneath him, a pull that was coming from within. The town had been waiting for him to embrace it, to claim it. Jericho had never truly been free. Not now, not ever. Mora's eyes flashed. "You'll see it, Caleb. You'll understand. The curse lives in you. It always has." He was trapped. He was caught in the bloodline, tied to the earth, to the dead. And in that moment, Caleb understood. This wasn't his victory. This was only the beginning of something far worse. Jericho's curse had only just found its new master. Caleb didn't know if he could escape it. He didn't know if he even wanted to anymore. The choice had been made for him, long before Head ever set foot in the town. The hunger, the darkness, it was in his blood. He was the new keeper of the curse. As he stood there, the rumbling grew louder, and the town's heartbeat echoed in his ears. Jericho was alive, and it was his to command. But as Caleb embraced the power, he realized something even darker. The curse had been passed down through generations, but its true master was not the town. It was him, and the price of this power was something far worse than death. Caleb stood at the center of Jericho, the weight of his newfound power settling over him like a shroud. The land beneath his feet pulsed with life, as if it had become an extension of his very soul. He could feel the heartbeat of the town, steady, rhythmic, and dark. Jericho had always been bound by its curse, but now, the curse was his to command. Mora stood beside him, watching with an expression that was a mixture of satisfaction and something darker, something he couldn't quite place. She had told him he would understand, and now he did. The land, the bloodline, the curse. It was all part of a plan that had been set in motion long before he had ever arrived in Jericho. "You've accepted it," she said, her voice low and knowing. "You understand now, Caleb. This is your birthright." Caleb's hands trembled as he looked at the town around him. The dead still rested in their graves, but the earth was alive with energy. The streets were empty, but Caleb could feel the eyes of the town upon him, watching, waiting for him to make his move. The dead, the living, they were all bound to him now. "I didn't ask for this," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't want any of this." Mora's eyes flickered with something akin to pity. "None of us do, but it's what we are, Caleb. The bloodline of Jericho. It's what binds us. We can't escape it. Not now, not ever." As the weight of her words sank in, Caleb's mind raced. The dead, the land, the curse. It was all connected to him now. He was the keeper of the town's dark secrets, the one who controlled life and death within its borders. And in that moment, Caleb realized that his victory had been a lie. There was no freedom in Jericho. There never had been. The curse was eternal, and now it was his to carry. But just as the finality of his realization began to settle in, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're wrong, Caleb. Silas." The voice came from behind him, a rasping whisper that echoed through the empty streets. Caleb whipped around, his heart leaping into his throat. Silas, or what was left of him, stood before him. But it wasn't the Silas Caleb had seen before. This Silas was different. His form was barely human, more like a shadow of himself, warped and twisted by the dark power that had consumed him. "You thought you defeated me," Silas croaked, his voice distorted. "But you've only freed me. You've done exactly what I wanted you to do." Caleb took a step back, his mind reeling. "What are you talking about? You're supposed to be dead." Silas' twisted form shimmered, his mouth curling into a grotesque grin. "I was never truly dead, Caleb. The land is my vessel. It always has been. The curse is not a prison, but a gateway. I used you to open it, to bring back the one thing I needed. And now, the land belongs to me." Caleb's pulse quickened. "No, I stopped you. I stopped the ritual." Silas laughed, the sound low and raspy, like the wind itself was mocking him. "You stopped nothing. The land has a hunger, a need, and once you became part of it, You became part of its cycle. I didn't need to defeat you. I needed you to fulfill your role." The air around Caleb grew colder, the ground beneath him trembling once more. The town, the very earth, was alive with a dark energy that pulsed through his veins. He could feel it now, the pull of the land, the pull of the curse. Silas' words echoed in his mind. The land wasn't just cursed. It was a living entity, one that had been feeding on the souls of its people for centuries. "You see, Caleb," Silas continued, his voice growing stronger, "I never wanted power over the dead. The dead are just vessels, tools. What I wanted was to control the living. And now, thanks to you, I can." The world around Caleb seemed to darken as the shadow of Silas grew larger, its presence overwhelming. The pulse of the earth beneath him intensified, and Caleb could feel the town itself coming alive, shifting, changing. The land had begun to claim him as its own, but Silas had found a way to seize control of it, to bend it to his will. Caleb's heart raced as realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. Silas had never been trying to control the dead. He had been trying to control the living, and Caleb was the key. Silas had manipulated him, used him as a pawn in his own twisted game. In that moment, Caleb knew what he had to do. He had to end it. He couldn't let Silas win. He couldn't let Jericho become a place of endless suffering, trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth. With a surge of energy, Caleb stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Silas. The scroll, still in his hand, began to burn with a fierce light. Caleb didn't understand how it was happening, but he knew what he had to do. The power of the land, the curse, the bloodline. It was all part of him now, and he would use it to destroy Silas, to break the cycle once and for all. He raised the scroll above his head, speaking the words of the incantation, louder this time, with every ounce of strength he had. Left. The ground shook violently beneath him, the earth splitting open as if the very town were trying to consume him. "No!" Silas screamed, his form flickering as the light from the scroll grew brighter, brighter still, until it consumed everything. And then, silence. When Caleb opened his eyes, he found himself alone in the heart of Jericho, the land calm once again. But something was wrong. Silas was gone, but the hunger of the land still lingered, deeper than ever before. Jericho had been freed, but the question remained, at what cost? Caleb opened his eyes to find the world still. The storm of dark energy had subsided, and Jericho was eerily quiet, as though it had been holding its breath for too long. The air was no longer thick with death's grip. The land, for the first time in what felt like forever, seemed at peace. But Caleb felt a cold emptiness in his chest, a void that could not be filled. He had done it. He had destroyed Silas, ended the ritual, and shattered the curse. But as he stood there, surrounded by the ruins of the town, he realized that peace was an illusion. Jericho had been bound to the land's curse for centuries, and while the cycle had been broken, something darker lingered, a shadow of the power that had once consumed it. Caleb stepped forward, feeling the ground beneath his feet shift as though the earth itself was watching him, judging him. The town had changed. It felt different, as if it had become a part of him. The power, the curse, it had always been a part of him. He couldn't escape it. He turned around to find Mora standing a few paces away, her face unreadable. Her eyes had lost their warmth, her expression distant. "You did it," she said quietly. "You broke the curse." "I stopped Silas," Caleb replied, his voice tight. "But it feels incomplete. Jericho is still here. The land still feels wrong." Mora didn't answer at first. Her gaze turned toward the cemetery, where the graves were now undisturbed. The ground seemed peaceful, but Caleb knew better. He could still feel the lingering presence of the curse buried deep within the earth. "It's not over," Mora said finally, her voice hollow. "You've stopped Silas, but the land's hunger remains. It always will. Jericho's curse was never meant to be broken. It's too deeply ingrained in this place, in its people. The power is in the land, Caleb, and now it's in you." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The curse wasn't something that could be destroyed. It was something that had to be carried, passed down. Silas had wanted control over it, but Caleb had become the vessel for that power instead. Caleb trailed off, struggling to put his thoughts into words. "I thought I could end it, but I can still feel it. The land's still calling. The power's still here." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You can never escape it. Jericho has claimed you, Caleb. The curse is yours now. You're the keeper of the land's hunger." The weight of her words crushed him. He had tried to fight it, tried to free the town, but now he understood. There was no freeing Jericho. Not from its past, and not from the land that fed off the suffering of its people. Jericho's curse wasn't just a power that could be destroyed. It was a cycle, and he was now part of it. But then, as if the town itself had heard his thoughts, the earth began to tremble once more. Caleb looked down, feeling the vibrations beneath his feet. A familiar energy surged through the ground, the same force he had felt when Silas was alive, when the ritual had been completed. Only this time, it wasn't Silas calling it. It was him. The ground cracked open in front of him, and from the depths of Jericho, a dark figure began to rise. It was not the creature that Silas had once unleashed, but something far more powerful. The earth seemed to exhale as the figure stepped forth, a towering shape made of shadow and death. Caleb knew instantly what it was. It was the true spirit of Jericho, the ancient force that had been bound to the town since its founding. It had waited centuries for this moment, for Caleb to take his place as its new master. "No," Caleb whispered, his breath catching in his throat. This isn't possible." Mora stepped forward, her eyes filled with regret. "It's the price you pay, Caleb. You wanted to stop Silas, but the land can never be free. Jericho is bound to its roots. You're its keeper now." The dark figure loomed over Caleb, its eyes glowing with an ancient hunger. The spirit of the town, the curse that had always been a part of it, was now his responsibility. The power of the land surged within him, binding him to its dark will. "You are mine now," the figure whispered, its voice like the rustling of leaves in a long-forgotten grave. "And you will feed me." Caleb's vision blurred as the power of the land flooded his senses. The earth, the dead, the living, they were all part of him now. He could feel the endless hunger of Jericho, the insatiable desire for life and death. The spirit's power was overwhelming, and for a moment, Caleb didn't know who he was anymore. He was part of the land was part of him. But then, just as the darkness threatened to consume him, a single thought broke through the fog of his mind. He had a choice. The power of the land was his, but so was the ability to control it. He didn't have to let Jericho continue its cycle of suffering. He could fight back. The land had claimed him, but it didn't own him. He could stop the curse. He could break the cycle. With every ounce of strength he had left, Caleb reached deep into the earth, drawing the energy of the land to him. But this time, instead of feeding the hunger, he forced it to retreat, pulling the darkness back into the depths from where it came. The spirit of Jericho screamed in fury, but Caleb didn't stop. He continued to draw the power, focusing it, controlling it, until the figure began to crumble. Slowly, the earth quieted, the shaking subsiding, and then silence. Jericho was still there, but Caleb had won. The curse was broken, or was it? The land's hunger had been stilled for now. But what Caleb didn't know was that the true test was yet to come. For even though the cycle was broken, the land would always be waiting, and so would the darkness. Final payoff. Caleb stood alone in the heart of Jericho, the weight of the land's curse lifting but not gone. The earth, once suffocating, now felt distant, yet undeniably connected to him. He had broken the cycle, but he knew the hunger of Jericho was never truly vanquished. It waited, dormant, beneath the surface, its power bound to him. He was its keeper now, but for how long? The land had claimed him, and though the curse was quiet, Caleb understood one thing. Jericho's darkness would never truly be silenced. He would be its ruler or its prisoner forever.